Call the HRA to order. Roll call. Call the HRA to order. Roll call. Tina?
I can't hear you very well, Chair Tolbert.
Can you hear me?
It's getting a little better.
Can others hear me? Thumbs up, thumbs down. All right. Tina, can you hear a little bit?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
All right. We'll call the HRA to order. Roll call.
Brenmoen? Here. Jalali?
Here.
Naker?
Here.
Prince?
Here.
Tao?
Here.
Tolbert?
Here.
Yang?
Here.
7 present, no one absent. It's my understanding that item number 1 and 2 are being withdrawn.
That's correct.
I'm sorry,
That's
can you
correct.
repeat that again?
It's my understanding that item number 1 and 2 are being withdrawn.
Councilmember Prince makes a motion to withdraw items number 1 and number 2. Roll call.
You can just withdraw them.
Correct.
Yeah, Chair Tolbert, I don't believe that there is a motion necessary to withdraw them.
Okay.
Item number 3, Resolution 20-1263, approving a temporary policy regarding the issuance of conduit revenue bonds for the benefit of charter school projects citywide.
All right, thank you very much. And I know Director Goodman does have a staff report on this, but I just want to, before she begins, talk about kind of the 2 things that we're focusing on here, both the issue at hand, which is to give to temporary halt conduit bonds for charter schools. That's the actual item that's before us, and that's as a result of the conversation at the last meeting. We wanted to have that policy be official, so staff had direct direction to tell charter schools who may be looking to apply that right now we are not doing conduit bonds if you are a charter school. The other thing that we would like to discuss, and I know Director Goodman will discuss kind of an overview on this, was we discussed getting a study or getting some sort of information to this board, to this body, so that we can have a better understanding of charter schools and the impacts that they have on our city budget and on our city. I was talking to Director Goodman about it, and I said, you know, it might make more sense to have a conversation here before a draft is written up or research is done, so that everybody's input can be shared. So on that part, we're not going to be voting on that today, but it's more for us to give some feedback to staff so that they can have direction. And when they come back with a proposed study or research, both in terms of scope and in timeline, they can do it based on what we wanted, and we don't say then, well, why didn't you do this? So that's the purpose of this discussion, but I think the actual motion before us, or the actual resolution before us, is regarding just a temporary halt on conduit bonds so that we can send that signal to both to our staff and to potential applicants that not to apply to the city of St. Paul at that point. But Director Goodman, I know you have some basic overview on both conduit bonds and financing and things like that. If you want to give that, then we could maybe have the two-part discussion. So thank you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Colbert. Thank you, Commissioners. So again, for this particular item, the chairman has gone over most of what the staff report says from the last meeting when commissioners directed us to study sort of the impacts, the concerns that you all had, and I know they've been going on for quite some time. We do have, a few inquiries, not official, nothing had not applications, but schools that are in the pipeline that have reached out. So this item today is just to again take that action that would serve to notify the schools that they should maybe explore alternative financing for now, for the time being, as this study is moving forward, just so they're not kept hanging while we work through the study and the board's request for information. So that's the item that's on the agenda today. I want to just, before you have your discussion, I have just a few things I want to point out, because I think that'll help to inform your discussion. None of this information is meant to advocate for any action or position, or just to give you an idea of kind of a few of the challenges with the data, so you're clear what we have to do, and then a couple of other things that you might want to consider. I'm going to try to share my screen. So let's see here. Hold on. I haven't shared a screen on this platform before. Let's see if I can even do that. Hold on. Can you see that? You see like the slides?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to walk through these quickly just so you have a little bit more background. I want you to be aware of the budget impacts of the fees related to conduit revenue bonds on our department, on PED. So some of this came from a study that was done in 2017, or some work that was collected by Holly Houston, I believe. I'm not certain I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Apologies, because I'm fairly new here. But these numbers in the actual collected fees are from that 2017, and so you can see they're significant numbers. The majority of those fees came from healthcare, for-profit rental housing, and charter schools. So those are, you can see how the revenue breaks down. We have $2.1 million in fees budgeted for 2020 and $2.25 million for 2021. So those are significant numbers. A couple of other things to consider. Bond issuances provide access to affordable capital for projects in St. Paul. So this is one key way that we support nonprofit community facility uses, such as hospitals and cultural organizations. And another just thing to keep in mind is that with bond financing, I did not have a chance to confirm if this was with conduit bond financing, but my belief is that it is, that the city's contract compliance requirements for contractor and subcontractor hiring for construction projects apply. So using that financing tool ensures that we get the community job benefits for those projects. So a couple of things. I wanted to just put in front of you what we heard you say in the last meeting, so that it's as a starting point, and we do again want to get clear direction, but we heard you asking specific to charter schools, how many charter schools have resulted in tax producing property being taken off the tax rolls, and what was the amount of lost tax revenue as a result. And then fiscal impacts to the city, like costs related to safety, streets, other infrastructure due to this charter school being there. And then impacts on St. Paul Public Schools. Equity is one that was mentioned, but we didn't talk about specific data points you would like for us to research there. And then fiscal impacts, which I just want to point out we can calculate to some degree, but it would be hard to know, if it may be impossible to know if a student would have attended St. Paul Public Schools if they didn't attend the charter school. So, and then another piece of information we need is how, over what time period, would you like for us to study those things? Let's see. And finally, there are a little bit of challenges just to keep in mind. Some of this data is somewhat subjective, so likely there would be data that could counter some assumptions that could be made with this data. The gathering of much of this data will require requests from other departments and entities, maybe assistance from a research provider, and maybe even a consultant. So there would be staff time and possibly consultant fees involved. We'll need to redirect some staff for some other things that we've been given priority on, the naturally affordable housing policy analysis and then an investment management database. So our research analyst is our primary staffer on both of those, and that's who would be working on this work as well. I'm a little concerned about time, just because even with help with cooperation from finance, Ramsey County, and the school district, and I know that should say SPPS, it could take as long maybe as a year to complete all of this, but we could likely produce deliverables in phases if we know which items are priority. And we just want to make sure that we're providing the information that you need, to make your policy decision. We would hate to spend staff time and money and give up a significant amount of revenue to produce a study if it doesn't give you what you need to make your policy decision. So this is just why we want to make sure that we get clear direction from you at this time. So with that, that is what I had to share.
Thank you very much. And there was a couple questions or comments during it. I have Commissioner Naker and then Commissioner Brennan.
Thanks, Chair Tolbert. So 2 quick questions, Director Goodman. First of all, I'm curious about the budget assumptions for 2021. That $2.25 million, is that a projection based on how many new revenue bonds we expect to issue, or is that currently our portfolio of revenue bonds will generate that amount no matter what we do from this point forward?
Let me see if Jenny Wolf is on the call.
Ms. Wolf?
Jenny Wolf here. Yes, Chair Tolbert, Commissioner Naker, and Commissioners. When we do our budget forecasting, we don't assume new closings, so those are existing bonds that have already been issued. I will say that just if there is a transaction that has to go elsewhere, and that may impact our fees because they may refund our bonds, and then we would no longer collect those fees from those bonds because they're based on the outstanding balance.
Thank you. That's helpful. I mean, it's really helpful data just to know what the impact of these contra revenue bonds is in general. I was just wondering if that meant we're going to lose $2.25 million by not doing them. So that's helpful. And then I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned that the study could take up to a year, potentially longer.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the realistic setting of expectations.
I'm just trying to literally be realistic. Like we have staff who are already very stretched. We have had, obviously, we worked on the bridge fund, COVID, things got behind. I know there's like an audit committee now that I'm wondering if there will be, things that we need to work on and related to that. That was new to me. It happened right after I came. I'm just concerned, just being clear, like very honest about prioritizing. Like if that's all we had to work on, obviously it wouldn't take that long. So I'm asking for like clear direction on, there are other things that have been given to us as priority, and I hear you. I'm coming here and I hear you saying we've been asking for this. So I'm just being very honest. Like, tell us what's priority and exactly what you need and exactly what like pieces of data you would need to come to like a policy decision on this, so we can help you get there.
I appreciate that. And my question was just going to be, I'm wondering, is this a formal moratorium? Because in that case, I know we have only a year to have a moratorium in place, or is this something else that we're talking about?
Director Goodman?
That's a good question. At this point, my understanding, and I would defer to I think Adam Niblick's on the phone, but this item is just a halt. It doesn't say moratorium. It's just that you won't be considering these applications for the time being while you're studying this, doing this research. But Adam, do you have an opinion on that?
Mr. Niblick, I think the intent of this is because we have a policy discretion to make these loans or not to make these loans. I wouldn't call it a moratorium, but county or city attorney Niblick.
Thank you, Chair Tolbert, Director Goodman. Yes. So the way that this is currently drafted, it is criteria for which the body itself would use to make decisions on conduit revenue bonds. The first of which criteria is to establish criteria, and I believe that that's what this action is. So it is putting a pause button on the current applications. That way, this body can formalize criteria for processing future requests. So I would definitely not call this a moratorium, but rather the first step in establishing those criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Niblick. Commissioner Naker, does that answer your question? All right, do you have more questions? Okay. Commissioner Brenmo?
Can't hear you. Can't hear you. I can't hear you.
You're on mute, Amy.
Oh, I thought it popped off, but must have gone back on. So I think this is going back to Ms. Naker's first question. The slide that was in front of us, I think for anybody who is just kind of on a flyby looking at that would make it sound like if we did cease to do these charter school bonds, that we would suddenly have a deficit of $2 million a year. And so I just want to be really clear that a conduit bond, every single year we collect fees on it until it's refunded or paid. Yes. So just to be clear, I feel like just when I first looked down at it, I was like, wow, that's a huge dent in our budget, when in fact it isn't, especially because as Ms. Naker drilled out, we don't budget these things anticipating additional closures. So I just think it's worth clarifying that particular slide. And then perhaps we're getting to this, but I want to make sure that there's an opportunity to clarify a bit. I appreciate the opportunity to give staff clear direction from the HRA, and I appreciate Mr. Tolbert's leadership to that end, because we've had this conversation many, many times without that tied off piece where it's like, here, this is what we'd like to do. I have some additional thoughts about things that I would like to look at. And also, I want to make sure that we're the right entity to be looking at some of these questions. If there's a possibility that there's the legislative auditor or the state auditor or the Board of Education is doing similar work, can we partner with them? I saw some lists of partners, but I want to make sure that we're doing the work that's appropriate and aligns with the city's work. And then partnering with our stakeholders in the city to make sure that their work is adding up to something with us as well. And I also do want to make sure that somewhere in the direction is a request for solutions beyond just ceasing to do conduit bonds. I think when we look at this, it is a great source of revenue for our city. Especially because when we're dealing with nonprofits, hospitals, and schools, they're not paying taxes. So it is certainly something that helps offset the cost that they add to the city, and I don't want to lose sight of that. However, I do feel, and I have mentioned this several times, that we end up talking to developments when they're so far along in the process that we can no longer ask the important questions we want to ask about the impacts to our city, like which parks are you planning to use and how can you help us maintain those parks? What semaphores and street improvements are you going to request, and can you include that in your initial budget? So I've been wondering about a conditional use permit as a condition of adding a school or perhaps any nonprofit in our city. So I want to make sure that we're looking at that type of solution as well as just saying no.
Great. And I have Commissioner Tao and then Commissioner Prince.
Thank you, Chair Tolbert. Director Goodman, thank you for the update and giving us a general idea of the impact and where we're at. I think when I look at this, I see this as this is a couple things, right? Well, the first one is it's about revenue. It should be a conversation about revenue and bringing revenue into the city, and using a source that has helped the city. 20%, it's a lot. And PD is actually one of the departments that has been very effective in building our city, getting us to the point where we are. And so we have to look at the opportunity loss. What does that mean for us, and how do we replace that 20% or whatever that amount that we'll be losing? We need to, whether it come from general fund or whatnot, that needs to be calculated. And then that has to be connected to the work that the Citizens League worked with us a couple of years ago on the pilot program, payment in lieu of taxes. That was a study that was very thorough, and it's just sitting in the parking lot somewhere. And so I think that should be part of this conversation and part of the study. The other part of this is I think this is about equity, because when we are taking a very surgical approach here to target the charter school, when hospital or other nonprofit also are part of this equation, right? And so, but for us to just pick the charter school, I feel that that's an equity issue. There's roughly 34 charter schools in St. Paul. Almost half of that are either operated or run by people of color or leadership of color. And so what are we, equity, we can't pick and choose what equity is. So to be fair, we should be looking at all nonprofits that aren't paying taxes when they apply for conduit bond, and to make it fair. Because otherwise, this issue about the school district not getting enough money, and so they're looking at the charter school as an adversary or a challenge to their budgeting, I think that's either a state issue and the state need to fully fund public education because we pay taxes to the state, or the school it's not budget appropriately or under or overspent. I don't know what the problem is there, but to Council President's point, like, are we the right entity to have this conversation? And if we are, who else needs to be a part of this conversation to make it fair and to make it equitable?
Great. And I have Commissioner Prince and then Commissioner Jalali after.
To Council Member Tao's point, I agree that breaking out just charter schools in this case is an equity issue, and it concerns me because I think in general we have struggled with what our policy should be on conduit bonds in general. I think what I would like to suggest is, I think this is a much larger conversation, and because of the revenue impacts, I mean, what I think I heard Ms. Wolf say is that if charter schools come forward and we are not available, they can continue to get money from other entities. But then they would take, if they're seeking a second conduit bond, they would take the fees that we're receiving with them to whatever that new entity is. So it would, in fact, have an impact on the fees that we're currently getting. And I think we have an issue in terms of our providing conduit bonds to nonprofits in general and the decision-making that we do around that. I agree that I often feel like we're shooting from the hip, and I think we need to change that. But I worry about taking a one-year bite out of these revenues to have this discussion. I would say that we should spend the year studying these, but we should allow new conduit bonds to move forward and just struggle as we have been with how we should vote on those. But I really am not interested in taking a one-year revenue bite out of potential bond fees.
Commissioner Jalali.
Thank you. I'm going to just ask for a point of clarification. I think we haven't gotten to talk a lot about this topic, and so now it's bringing up all of our multi-year held thoughts. So I feel like it's becoming a bit of a kitchen sink, but that's not bad. I just want a clarifying point here, which is it sounds like the intention and effect of this resolution today would be to initiate the temporary pause, and that we would then get to define going forward what we would want out of the review that we've talked about. And I imagine that takes a lot of steps. It includes checking in with our own departments. It includes understanding what's within our authority to regulate. And it would include, for many, if not all of us, talking to external stakeholders who have really pushed as well and who we are ultimately accountable to as our residents. And so what is the actual process for being able to contribute that information and to get from every council office an actual good detailed list? Because I don't disagree with doing an initial conversation here at the table, but I do, I personally need additional time over the next couple of weeks to be able to do rounds with lots of folks who have a stake in this and to understand better what we can require and what would be meaningful, and to then balance that against our capacity. So I'd like to understand from a process point what PD and Chair Tolbert would like to happen, just so that we can set that up well. And I think that there's a lot of people in the community interested in this discussion too, on kind of all angles and perspectives. And it's important to create a clear and thoughtful process for them. So I would like to hear how that piece of that is going to work.
Director Goodman, do you have thoughts?
Yes, and I will say that I don't know if there is any legal requirement for the process, but from just an administrative perspective, I think if each of you could sort of make your list, and we would happily try to compile those and compare, and we may need to come back, like maybe we have a deadline that you have that to us, maybe not by the next meeting, but the following or whatever. We pick however much time you think it will take, and get that to us. We'll try to compile the list, find the common places, find the things we're not sure about, and then we can either have another discussion this way or through, I think we can just assist in honing that down. But again, at the end of the day, we want to have a clear direction and understanding of what you're looking for.
Okay, that's helpful, and I appreciate that. There's certainly a list of things I named last time we talked about this.
Yep.
There's kind of a range of different things people have brought up here. I think that it would really help me as an individual to have that time, and I would like to make sure I can check in with, I've said this before, but I'll repeat again since it's worth repeating, that a lot of the area of the city that I represent is like disproportionately set up through former land use patterns to then be to lend itself to be where charters want to relocate. And I'm not the only ward office in that position, but my constituents uniquely care, and it's also a big part of the work I'm asked to do. So thank you for that and for clarifying. I think it helps me to understand what today's vote is and what it is not. And my intention is that we structure a really thoughtful and meaningful review. I think there is an urgency to figuring this out. I recognize staff capacity, and I recognize that we have a lot of things on our plates, but we've also really wanted to do this for a long time before I was even an HRA commissioner. And I made a pledge to not actually approve future requests at all until this information comes forward. I think that's important. So thank you for answering my questions about the process.
Great. Commissioner Naker, then Commissioner Tao.
Thanks, Chair Tolbert. I appreciate this conversation, and it seems to me that while we might be talking about it as a neutral thing, that a delay, any amount of time that this temporary policy lasts, is not actually neutral, because the amount of time that we spend figuring out whether or not we want to stop issuing conduit revenue bonds to charters, the amount of time we take to figure out our criteria, all of that time is time that potential applicants cannot come to us and get bonding. And we know that there are, as Director Goodman mentioned, there are several applicants already in the wings. So I'm worried because I know how these, we all know how these processes can tend to drag out. And I worry that all of that time that we're studying the issue, we are also making kind of a decision about the issue, which is that in that meantime, we are not issuing those revenue bonds.
Commissioner Naker, I think you cut out. I think your microphone might be.
Yep, there we go. Back.
There we go.
Yes, okay.
All right.
I would feel much more comfortable with this resolution if it had an end date, kind of like the executive orders expire after a certain point, maybe a 6-month end date by which at that.
Your microphone again. I think maybe take it off and just use the computer.
I think I'm back. I don't know. Did anybody hear anything I said?
Kind of. An end date, maybe 6 months, and then revisit it like the executive order.
More eloquently than I could have ever have said it, Chair Tolbert, yes.
Do you have more?
I'd like to see that. I think that would help me feel comfortable with this.
Okay. Is that?
It's a formal, I'll make it a motion that we set this to expire in 6 months.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion? Let's see.
Chair Tolbert?
Commissioner Tao.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I guess I'm a little bit confused here. So I think any language that involves stoppage temporary stoppage should include all non-tax-paying entity that are eligible for a conduit bond.
Okay, let's maybe, Commissioner Tao, maybe, because that would be a separate amendment, I think, maybe we can discuss. Commissioner Nager just made an amendment to this, and then we can, since you're next, do you want to bring that amendment?
And sorry, Chair Tolbert, Commissioner Nager, just for the record, since we are virtual, I wanted to make sure that we know exactly what the proposed amendment is going to read. So the way I understand Commissioner Naker's amendment, it would be to the second, therefore. The second, therefore, would now read, this temporary policy will remain in place for no longer than 6 months or until another point in time which this board revokes the policy.
That's right.
Okay, and that was City Attorney Adam Niblick talking for whoever's taking the minutes. Maybe, do you want to, we can look at a calendar and just put a date on there?
March 9th.
What did you say?
Said March 9th.
That's 6 months away. Wow. All right. Does that date a Wednesday, Adam? Or all right. March 9th is the proposal. Any discussion on that item? Let's see. Commissioner Tao, you have your hand up. Is that to discuss this amendment? Okay, Commissioner Yang, to discuss this amendment? No.
And Chair Tolbert, before you take a vote on it, I would just like to articulate the amendment one more time. That way we're clear on it. So the second, therefore, clause would read, this temporary policy will expire on March 9th, 2021, or at such earlier date, which this board shall revoke the policy.
Okay. Let's see. I have people's hands up to talk on this amendment. Commissioner Brenmo, Commissioner Prince, and Commissioner Yang. Commissioner Yang?
Thank you. Just a quick comment. Thank you to you, Chair Tolbert, and also Director Goodman and other staff who helped put together the resolution. When I saw it on the agenda, it appeared so quickly, and I was really glad to see that we were really moving this along. And so thanks for your commitment to that. I do want to share that, I do support the resolution. I think in terms of the motion for the 6 month limit here, what would be, I think, like more helpful is actually trying to figure out what we want to accomplish by the end of that 6 months. Because I think it's important for us to have like some sort of system to hold us accountable to like what, we need to be doing within these 6 months that we're actually putting a pause on these conduit bonds. And I think that with the way it is now, it doesn't seem like we have much teeth to that. And so I don't know exactly, what we would need in between, but I know that from conversations I've been having with people since the last conduit bond vote we had, a lot of people wanted to be able to give input on what it looked like for us to have some sort of like work group around trying to figure out what a research looks like, or even like, whether the city council should be the one doing this or if it should be like a third party of some sort trying to do a research. And so I wanted to share this in hopes that we can try to figure out if we do want to attach some sort of goals or deliverables to the motion. And I think having a time limit on it would be helpful so that we could, keep pushing this along and trying to stay within a timeline.
Commissioner Brennan?
I think just on echoing that point, I would be supportive of a 6-month timeline. I would vote in support of this amendment, and because I think it actually would facilitate that conversation to establish exactly what we're looking for. And I also believe that if we have a limited amount of time, we can also limit our scope and get answers to the questions and not try to study every last detail, but the things that we really need to hone in on. So I would support that. I think it would facilitate a faster process and force us to get to those conclusions much more quickly.
Thank you. Commissioner Prince?
I appreciate the discussion so far. I am wondering if there is any openness. We have a 6-month deadline amendment before us. I had suggested that we just continue to process applications while we do the study. I just wanted to see if council member or if Commissioner Naker would consider that as a friendly amendment to just continue our process of accepting applications while we do this study. I agree that we have to time limit it. 6 months is reasonable, but my concern is that we are not, that we're going to be losing revenue in the meantime.
Commissioner Naker?
Thank you. I'll just say I consider the question of whether or not we're going to approve these to be a moot point. It sounds like a majority of council members have publicly stated that they won't be approving these until we have a policy. So my intention is just to get us to that policy, make a decision on this as quickly as possible. But I think people have stated that they won't be voting in favor and that's a majority.
Thank you.
Okay. Any Commissioner Jalali? You're on mute, Commissioner.
I'm sorry. I'm building off of Commissioner Yang and Brenmoen's points that I think I am supportive of a 6-month timeline to give us some working deadlines. I agree strongly with what both Commissioners Yang and Brenmoen said. We need to define what we want out of that. One of the things that is important about the process is there's things that the city uniquely can and must study within our power and capacity and ability and relevance. Then there are broader questions that we continually hear about all the time and share that other entities might be positioned to study. And I think all of that evidence and research needs to be done in engagement with our community and with stakeholders who are pushing for additional possible reviews with other entities. And so I think that we can get moving on the direction that we promised. I personally, I feel comfortable with the amendment Councilmember or Commissioner Naker's bringing in its form. I had asked earlier, and I think that point still stands, that we can all basically offer after today's meeting the things that we really want. And I will be thinking about that through a new lens of, in the short term and within 6 months, here's the things that I believe are important to include, and we can all do that work. So assuming that whole process and overall direction works, I feel supportive of the amendment as is.
Okay. Any other comments on this amendment? If not, roll call.
Brenmoen.
Aye.
Jalali.
Aye.
Naker.
Aye.
Prince.
Aye.
Tao.
Aye.
Yang.
Aye.
Chair Tolbert.
Yes.
7 in favor, 0 opposed. The resolution is amended.
All right. I think Commissioner Tao was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to add an amendment to it that it should include charter school and other non-property tax paying entity because there is the argument I made earlier that this is about tax revenue for the city, and really taking this opportunity to connect the needs of our non-tax-paying entity, the nonprofit and the hospital and whatnot, and then engaging them again. The conversation that we've been having about the payment in lieu of taxes program, and there's a good opportunity for us to work on this right now. So my amendment would be to include other non-tax-paying, property tax-paying entity as part of this study.
Okay, so the language of your amendment, so we can write that down, I suspect would be something to the effect of a temporary halt on all conduit bond applications and financing. Correct? Commissioner
Yes.
Tom? Okay. We can have discussion on that. Maybe Adam can write something quickly that would be that amendment, unless he already has it.
Yes, for the record, I believe the proposed amendment would strike the last whereas clause and amend the first therefore clause to say a temporary policy is hereby adopted that halts the consideration of proposals for the issuance of conduit revenue bonds, period.
Great. Is that acceptable, Commissioner Tao?
Adam, can you please read that again? I'm pulling it up.
Sure. The way I understand the proposed amendment would be to the substance of it would effectively strike the final whereas clause that starts with this action would serve in its entirety. And then it would also amend the first therefore clause, which would now read a temporary policy is hereby adopted that halts the consideration of proposals for the issuance of conduit revenue bonds, period.
Commissioner Tots, Dr. Goodman here. That you had said other non-tax-paying entities. Are you saying no? We have, I believe we have some that are tax-paying entities, and we have housing revenue bonds. We have other things that would be impactful.
Commissioner Tao?
That is correct. And so we're not. I'm not talking about profit entity or tax-paying entity like housing. I'm just talking about non-tax-paying entities such as hospital, nonprofit, or charter school.
All right. Maybe more specifically, you're talking applicants who qualify as property tax exempt under Minnesota law. Would that be what you mean?
I think that's very detailed. That's the more detailed, probably the better.
Okay. So Adam Niblick here, Assistant City Attorney, Chair Tolbert. This is what I believe the substance of Commissioner Tao's amendment would read. Again, it would strike the last whereas clause, and it would amend the first therefore clause to read a temporary policy is hereby adopted that halts the consideration of proposals for the issuance of conduit revenue bonds for entities which are classified as tax exempt under Minnesota law.
Does that, Commissioner Tao? All right, Director Goodman, does that give the direction? If this passes, does that give the direction that you would need?
Thank you, Chairman. I do want to just clarify. You said property tax exempt, and Mr. Niblick said tax exempt. Jenny Wolf, does that impact us differently?
This is Jenny Wolf with PED, Chair Tolbert, Commissioners. I believe it's the tax exempt entity that qualifies under the conduit bond financing. Not all tax exempt entities may be in tax exempt properties. So I guess I'm not sure. I think tax exempt entities is fine, but they might be paying property taxes. It's one doesn't assume the other one. And then if I might add, Mr. Niblick, that the policy was also through direct issuance or host approval, which would mean that we wouldn't allow another municipality to issue the bonds for that entity. So I think we want to keep that in the therefore. And I think we want to say property tax exempt instead of tax exempt entity.
Thank you, Jenny Wolf, would you kindly recite what you propose the first therefore clause to read? That way we have a clear articulation for the record.
So we would read, a temporary policy is hereby adopted that halts the consideration of proposals for the issuance of conduit revenue bonds for non-property tax paying entities, either through direct issuance or through host approval.
And Commissioner Tao, does that meet your desire of amendment?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I do have comments on this, but it looks like a few other people do. Commissioner Prince and Commissioner Jalali. I think Commissioner Jalali had her hand up first, so, and then Commissioner Prince.
I would like to hear from other folks, but my initial inclination is that I appreciate the goals and agree with the goals of what Commissioner Tao hopes to accomplish. I originally and continue to just, I think this conversation has been brought forward today because we are trying to get a better sense of the impacts on charter schools and charter expansion to our tax base and what other avenues we have as a city to explore how we can better, within our powers and authority, equitably regulate the specific entity. And my concern with the amendment is that it suddenly brings in additional entities to the scope of what we're trying to do that are right to be explored, but it feels like it's expanding a topic we'd already defined. And I just worry that it potentially creates more confusion. And so I'd like to figure out how to connect those two conversations, but it feels potentially complicated to try to do it all in this one. So I don't know that I can support it. I'd like to hear others' thoughts, but I do care about the overall impacts that other non-taxpaying entities provide. I just am mindful of, I think that we have one step ahead of us we're trying to do, and this potentially is biting off even more at a time when we're even trying to weigh the capacity we have to do the first step that we fought very hard to get to. So would like to hear other folks' thoughts, but I'm not inclined to support this amendment, even though I support the goals.
Commissioner Prince.
You know, I'm not sure where it came from, but there is a version 2 on the HRA agenda that does exactly what we're talking about. So I'm not sure where it came from, but Mr. Niblick might want to look at version 2 that is on the agenda, which does take out the charter school references. I will say, for myself, I'm really struggling with what we're doing here. I really think this is a good conversation, but I support Councilmember Tao's motion because we have wrestled with this not only on charter schools. If you recall, the one that we voted against, which involved the tax exempt land issue, was for higher ed. So this is not, charter schools are not the only entities that we really need to have a policy on. And if it's a 6-month delay, if we're time limiting it, I would support council, as long as we're doing that, I support Councilmember Tao's motion.
Commissioner Yang.
Thank you, Chair Tolbert. I just wanted to get a bit of intel from you all since you've been on the council for, for over like 4 years or so now. In the past, when you had conduit bond requests in front of you from other entities that weren't charter schools, so let's say, for example, hospitals, what were some of the tensions that you felt around that?
Okay, thank you.
That I think would lead to, the question around like, wanting to put together like possibly like some sort of policy or screening process for all conduit bond requests.
Great. And that kind of could lead into what my comments on this amendment are, but I will say, as everyone here knows, conduit bonds, we're strictly a pass-through on it. It's money that an entity that's tax exempt, not necessarily property tax exempt, but tax exempt nonprofit can qualify for, and they can use the rate that we qualify for, and therefore we charge admin fees. So, but without any liability of, or financial liability or connection or risk. So basically it's a way for us, it's a revenue source that's very easy for us, for lack of a better term. And it's one where, as we've discussed at length, and we saw at previous times, if we choose not to issue the conduit bond, oftentimes these entities can go to other places and they get the admin fees instead of us. And it might not be a ton, as I think Commissioner Naker's question was great, and Jenny answered that we have ongoing fees coming in, but over time that starts adding up and that amount will dwindle. In terms of this, I think Commissioner Prince actually of doing this study while allowing the conduit bonds to continue makes sense, in my opinion. The reason I think we do just this, if we're going to do any temporary halt on conduit bonds, is because we've identified that charter schools are causing financial issues within the city of St. Paul, and it's something that we need to have a better understanding on before we continue to be complicit via conduit bonds, which we have no financial entanglements with, except for the admin fees that we gain, that we put a halt on it so we can fully understand the economic impacts. And, my thoughts on those are, what is the property tax values that we're taking off the property tax rolls, and that's something that we can easily mathematically figure out when you add up all those plats. And the Ramsey County assessor actually has taxable value for every plat, even if they are property tax exempt, even for like St. Thomas University. We can look at the additional public works costs that we've had to go add stop signs or stoplights or other things. But those are the things that we can look at. But I would speak against Commissioner Tao's amendment, even though I understand where it's coming from, because we've identified that there is a specific issue with charter schools, and we, out of respect, should give potential applicants the heads up that we're not going to be approving these, so they don't spend months going through the financing requests with and wasting our staff's time too, when we're just going to deny it. The other ones, I don't think I don't have the plan to have a blanket denial on any other ones that go through, whether it's a private school, a college, or a hospital. And that's why I would speak against this. I think we should be very narrow in what our policy is today if we are going to do that halt. So I think that's kind of the history on these. I mean, conduit bonds have probably got more attention in the last ever since the Concordia conduit bond. That's probably, they've gotten more attention since then than they did that was probably about a year and a half ago than in the previous 7 years that I was on the council and the HRA before that. I mean, I think historically the thing that I remember that we recall most about conduit bonds was your predecessor, Commissioner Bostrom, always saying, those are conduit bonds. That means we have no financial entanglement with these and no financial liability. And he would ensure that to the point where it's just a standard provision in the policy, in the staff reports now. But other than that, I don't think there was a historical tug and war, because quite frankly, it's just, we get admin fees. So anyways, that's a long way that's my history, and I'm sure other people have historical recollection on that, but I would vote against Commissioner Tao's amendment. Commissioner Naker?
Thank you, Chair Tolbert. I'm going to speak in favor of Commissioner Tao's amendment. What I like about it is that it is consistent. I think to date we have had, to Commissioner Chair Tolbert's point, we've been consistently neutral in terms of the content of conduit revenue bonds. We have looked not at all at any of the applicants in any way, except for their sort of fiduciary monetary capacity to bear the bonds. Now we're talking about looking at charter schools in a wholly different way. And what I worry about is that by singling out charter schools, we are presupposing the outcome of our study. The study is to see whether or not charter schools have some sort of extraordinarily damaging impact on the things that we as a city need to be concerned about. But we don't know that yet. I don't think we have established. We've heard concerns. We've heard, I have emails in my inbox expressing concerns about not granting conduit revenue bonds to charter schools. So I don't think we've determined yet that those particular uses have an outsized impact. That's what the study's to figure out. What I wouldn't want to have happen is go through the study only on charter schools, then come up with a policy where we place strict attention to charter school revenue bonds, and any other conduit revenue bond that comes in automatically passes without much scrutiny. I would rather have broad parameters for how we make decisions about conduit revenue bonds if we're going to move away from basically just being neutral as to all of them. So I'm very nervous about the revenue loss as well. I think that's why the 6-month stopping the bleeding for me is really important, and we need to just get this done. But I support Councilmember Tao's motion.
Great. Commissioner Tao? He's on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, sir. Again, I just want to emphasize that this is a very, I feel this is very biased, and that it's targeting a entity that serve a lot of members of communities of color, families of color in this city. When you go to a school, if you're a non-English speaker, then you get more federal dollar to go into that school. And so if we want to talk about just choosing charter school to be in this study, then we need to talk about the facts. We need to talk about how unfair this is to those families that the charter school actually serve. And so for us to be unbiased, for us to do our work properly, that we should include all folks who aren't paying property taxes, so that when we go back to the charter school or these nonprofit, whatever the outcome is, this is a fair process. If we're targeting just the charter school, I mean, we could even open ourselves exposure to lawsuit and discrimination. I'm not saying that that's what they'll do, but if half of the charter schools are run by people of color, and we're creating this policy that is very targeted toward them, I just think that's very unfair. I think the fair thing is it's a 6-month, right, period for PED staff to look into this and bring everybody along and make sure that if you're not paying property taxes, there's other ways for you to contribute to the city of St. Paul. That should be the outcome. The outcome is ensuring that we have those tax revenue to ensure that our city sustain itself and our PED department continue to do the work that they need to do.
Great. Commissioner Prince?
Yeah, I would just like to emphasize Commissioner Naker's point about the fact that our action today isn't neutral. We are holding charter schools out from being able to get this kind of support, and we're not applying it to all of our conduit bonds. And just by the example of Concordia University, that was higher ed, and that involved an issue that I suspect we will revisit as part of the study, which is removing taxable property from the tax rolls. Also, I believe we have looked at in the past on hospitals, I believe the issue of labor practices came up. So I think that we are obligated not to single out a category of nonprofits that cannot, that will not be able to be recipients of this financing by failing to have this study applied to all of our policy, coming up with a policy to deal with all conduit bond issues in this category of assisting nonprofit entities within the city.
Commissioner Jalali.
Thanks. I will be brief and just I'd like to reiterate my position on this and that I'm thinking about it in terms of just keeping the work in clear places. I think that the broader tax impact and tax-based policies are important. They also do contribute to the overall state of funding for our public schools. All of that is important. Work has been done to review pilot. We need to continue those conversations. So I want to just clarify that I do worry about kind of combining a bunch of work into one thing. We are trying to have conversations that work on it in pieces and break it apart, and then we can figure out how to fit it together. And so I don't want to distract from, we have just as an HRA finally gotten to a point where we're willing to actually do something different with charter conduit bonds. And I don't think that means we can't do something different with other types too. So I really just want to keep this resolution focused as it is for sake of getting the work done. So I'll be voting no, but I support the spirit of the conversation. I appreciate the discussion here today.
Director Goodman.
Yeah. I just want to just get a point of clarification, because it sounds like it's gotten a little confusing. The 6-month time period was to not consider the applications, but it sounds like it's become an expectation that we would have the work done in 6 months. And I just wanted to clarify that if it's just about charter schools even, and it sounds like the scope is creeping a little bit there, I do believe it could take up to a year. So I just throwing that back out there that I don't know what, we need to be clear on what we expect to happen in 6 months that would, impact this whatever decision you make today.
All right, thank you. I think that's an important clarification that that this amendment seems to imply that there's a mission creep or scope creep in terms of the data that we're going to start collecting. And we should make that clear to staff so that they are studying the right things. I mean, I strongly do not support this amendment because some of these conduit bonds that come in, I think of the last one that we have, are important expansions and investments into hospitals. And I would hate for a hospital to come in the next 6 months needing to do an expansion for a wing or something, particularly one that might have a COVID wing. And I don't know any that might come in, but that we might not be able to help out in their expansion because we have made a blanket policy on conduit bonds beyond charter schools, when the issue that we're really looking at is what are the effects of the proliferation of charter schools in our city. And I think that's really the underlying question. And I think that our policy should stay very clear to that. So I'm going to be voting no on that because I am not ready to make that blanket policy choice on these conduit bonds. Granted, as I said, every conduit bond, whether it's ours or the ports or whose, it comes through the HRA or city council for approval. And we can make the up or down vote on those individually, but to do a blanket regarding hospitals, and that this amendment, in my understanding, it would likely cover hospitals. I think that's an important thing for us to take under consideration while we do that. So Commissioner Yang, and then Commissioner Prince, and then Commissioner Brenmo.
Thank you. Director Goodman, I have some questions for you because I know that a lot of this work will be happening within your department. And so just trying to, put my thoughts together here. I'm curious too, if the motion here did go through, can you walk through what a study would look like? Like, does it feel like, any study that's actually more directly, relating toward the charter school conduit bonds would be, I guess, like work toward that could be somehow like taken away, since now we're trying to figure out what the larger discussion is around conduit bonds. I'm asking because for me, what's actually really important is making sure that we are able to do a really deep research on the impact of charter schools on our community and our public school system overall, because that's where the heart of this discussion came from. And I feel that in the way that our HRA board has been operating since maybe the beginning of time of when charter schools started coming here, or started opening up and just evolving, I think that without any type of screening or deep questioning of intentions from our schools, and like the HRA board just continuing to like easily pass these things through, it's almost like this feels like our HRA board is so complicit and actually like dismantling our public school system, and that's not okay. And that's why I think we need to be having this intentional conversation about charter schools, and I don't want that to actually be watered down at all from a larger project or research being conducted. So having that input from you would be super helpful.
So I can just say that the work that we do will be directed by this body, by what you're looking, exactly what you're looking for. My thoughts up to today, when I was sort of making that presentation, was based on an assumption that the concern was about what you're like charter schools specifically, and so all of those data points that I mentioned were like specific to charter schools because that was your concern. These are the things that we would look at, and the method by which we would gather data and how it would be presented really depends on exactly what data points it is that you all are looking for. So that's yet to be completely determined, but I did list a few that I heard in the last meeting. If the discussion goes beyond that and the question is, should we do this at all, or what are the other impacts? Again, this has been a vehicle that's been a fairly non-labor intensive good source of revenue, and it has some good impacts to the community. So I don't know that I didn't feel that you were questioning the process or the vehicle or the tool in general. It wasn't my impression, and so my report to you was specific to what sounded like a concern about charter schools specifically, and so that's where we would be focusing unless we have some other direction. And I'm looking for direction, of course, on exactly what you would like to know to help you make your policy decision on charter schools. That's where I started today, Commissioner.
Okay. I know we have a couple other people that want to comment. The more I'm hearing this conversation, I'm starting to think that it might make more sense for everybody to give their input to Director Goodman and PED staff and then to come back and have this conversation, because this scope and expectation by committee here is, I think, going to give very mixed direction to Director Goodman. I know we have an amendment to vote on here, but I'm just thinking out loud that we might want to think about that before we make any final discussions, because if I was in Director Goodman's shoes, I wouldn't know, quite frankly, what to study based on our conversation today.
Can I make a quick comment, Chair Tolbert?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to say that, just as a follow-up from the things that you shared, Director Goodman, I feel that, we have a lot to talk about on the table. And I think for me, I still have a lot of clarification I need, and, to have more conversations with council members or commissioners, and to try and figure out, what that larger picture looks like for the conduit bond requests. And I came to the table ready to actually focus on, moving us forward in conduit bond requests related to charter schools. And I don't think that I'm not closing the door at all on what it looks like for us to discuss what it looks like, for other entities. I would love to have the conversation, because I think that we do need to have that in place. But I feel that right now is not actually a moment to do that, and we need to have a deeper discussion about it.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Prince, Commissioner Brenbaum, and Commissioner Tao.
I appreciate the idea of laying this over, and specifically, I would like to ask Mr. Niblick to look at whether we would be subject to any action for specifically limiting one type of nonprofit from being able to apply for these bonds, even for a 6-month period. I think we need a legal opinion on that.
Okay. Commissioner Brenbaum?
I was just going to basically say what you said. I'm starting to feel confused by what's in front of us and what we're asking the PED to do. And I think it's very important that we're very clear and very specific about what we're looking for, what are the outcomes, what are the legal questions, and I would be supportive of laying it over as you propose. And I think I had just heard Ms. Prince say the same, just to allow opportunity for staff to collect the input from folks and come back with a succinct plan. So we're voting on something with the scope attached to it, as opposed to voting on it and then just defining the scope.
Great. Commissioner Tao. You're on mute again, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would support layover. I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be unpacked around this issue. And so I don't want to lose any revenue for the city, especially for the PD department.
Okay. So do you want to, since it sounds like we have a majority who wants to lay it over, do you want to vote on your amendment now, or do we want to revisit that when we bring this back in a couple weeks? Since you did have an amendment motion on the table.
I want to withdraw my amendment, and I want to work with Director Goodman and the rest of the council to come with a language that doesn't put us at a disadvantage or liable for lawsuit or different things, but that makes sense for us. So I will withdraw.
Great. All right. Thank you. We have a motion to withdraw, and I'm thinking Director Goodman, not the next meeting, but probably the one after that, since everybody wants to email stuff in and give you ideas, and it might take some time for your staff to talk to commissioners and things like that. So I don't have an HRA schedule. Maybe, does anyone have an HRA schedule right in front of them so we can get the exact date to lay this over to?
October 14th.
October 14th. Does that work for everybody? I'll make a motion to lay this matter over to October 14th. All right. Any comments on that? If not, a roll call.
Renmoen.
Aye.
Jalali.
Aye.
Naker.
Aye.
Prince.
Aye.
Tao.
Aye.
Yang.
Aye.
Chair Tolbert.
Yes.
7 in favor, none opposed. This resolution is laid over to the October 14th HRA board meeting.
And that brings this meeting to an end. I will make a motion to adjourn. Thank you. Bye.